Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. This is just a month-long series to celebrate logistics and promote the appreciation of the important role that the logistics industry plays. The Celebration of Logistics is a new program. It replaces our State of Trade and Transportation and World Trade Week events, and we really appreciate you joining us today. For those that don't know me, my name is Christine Boss, and I serve as the Government Affairs Manager for the Long Beach Area Chamber of Commerce. But before we begin, we're just going to get on with some brief housekeeping. First, we want to encourage everyone to use the Q&A feature, which can be found at the bottom of your screen. And we'll save all questions for the end of the program, but feel free to ask them along the way as they come up. And please note that this webinar will be recorded and distributed to all registrants and chamber members. The final Celebration and Logistics series will take place next Thursday, May 27th at 10 a.m. And I hope that you'll join us for that. And I want to start by giving a huge thank you to Moffitt and Nichol for being the title sponsor of the entire series, and we'll hear from them in just a moment. But I'd also like to thank our major sponsors. Our series sponsor, the Port of Long Beach. Our gold sponsors, AES, Dignity Health St. Mary Medical Center, Hawaiian Airlines, Long Beach Airport, Marathon, Mitsubishi Cement, Southwest Airlines, and Turkish Airlines. It's my pleasure to introduce our title sponsor, Jennifer Chase, the Senior Manager of Terminal Operations and Development for Moffitt and Nichol. And Jennifer, go ahead and take it away.
Okay, wonderful. Well, good morning, and thank you so much for having us. It's really an honor to be here with everyone this morning. So before we get started, I wanted to just take a few moments to introduce everyone to Moffitt and Nichol in case we haven't had the pleasure of meeting before. So Long Beach has been our home base since 1945, and like many young professionals, our founders, John Moffitt and Frank Nichol, came to Southern California in the early 1940s to support Navy projects during World War II, and that's really where we got our start. By the end of the war, they saw great potential for the engineering profession in San Pedro Bay and throughout the surrounding region. And since then, we've played a role in projects that have marked significant milestones for the port complex as well as Long Beach as a whole. These projects include some you may be familiar with, such as the original Gerald Desmond Bridge, the Alameda Corridor, and more recently, the Port of Long Beach Container Terminal Project. The original Gerald Desmond Bridge replaced a bouncing temporary pontoon bridge and prepared the port complex for the exponential growth to come in the following years. The Alameda Corridor allows our ports to grow and takes thousands of trucks off our highways each and every day. And last but certainly not least, Long Beach Container Terminal is among the most efficient and environmentally responsible marine terminals in the world. So proud to have worked on all of those projects in our local community. Additionally, our current work on the 405 express lanes will allow thousands of port employees to get to work faster, while our current work on several major rail projects in Southern California will further cement our region as a true hub in North America for logistics in the world marketplace. So long story short, Long Beach is really a global logistics powerhouse. 75 years after its founding, Moffitt and Nichol's partnership of two has grown to more than 830 employees and over 40 offices throughout North America, Europe, South America, and the Pacific Rim. We're proud to still call Long Beach our home. We're still a family-owned operation with corporate offices at Douglas Park. And we're excited to work collaboratively across our main practice areas, which include ports, waterways, and transportation, to create infrastructure that make logistics in Long Beach and around the world. So with that, I do want to just take a quick moment. I think we have a brief video that we would like to share with the group. So Amanda, if you could go ahead and play that video, please.
Long Beach Container Terminal, commonly referred to as the Middle Harbor Redevelopment Project, has been 12 years in the making. It is currently the most significant maritime project in North America. And not only is it the most technologically advanced container terminal in North America, it is the cleanest container terminal on the planet. And we're proud of that.
Moffett Nichols been part of the project from day one. The master planning of the terminal, laying it out, looking at the modes of operation, the infrastructure required to support that operation. Throughout this project, one of the key things that I've learned is the importance of teamwork and collaboration, bringing both parties together to understand the design side and to understand the operations side.
And that's the good thing about our partnership, is that Moffett Nichols, they've been there from the beginning for the long haul, and they will be there at the very end. And that partnership has been invaluable to Long Beach Container Terminal.
Great.
Long Beach
Thank you.
Container Terminal.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for joining us and just kind of giving us a brief background on the company. And thank you, Moffett Nichols, for your sponsorship. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today. That is Sem Ponnambalam. Sem is the co-founder and president of Exahive. Exahive is a cybersecurity company founded to fulfill the need to provide safe, secure, and economical cybersecurity tools and solutions in the ever-expanding internet-based communication space. Exahive has offices in California, New York, Canada, and the United Kingdom. At Exahive, Sem is responsible for global operations with 18 plus years experience in the private and public sectors. Sem has been instrumental in building relationships with Exahive, SBDC California, BlackBerry, Red Hat, and IBM globally, to name a few. Sem has co-authored 3 books on cybersecurity and lectures for businesses, associations, and academic institutions in the US, Canada, and Europe. In April, Sem received a special U.S. congressional recognition for having been selected as a cybersecurity panelist for the World Summit on the Information Society. Sem holds a bachelor's degree from Carleton University in political science with a concentration in international relations and a master's degree in legal studies from Carleton University. Sem is also a proud mother to a 2-year-old daughter. Sem, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you so much. I'd like to thank the Long Beach Area Chamber of Commerce and all of you for joining us today. I hope you're all keeping safe and healthy. So as mentioned before, I'll quickly start with the presentation. So we'll switch over to the objectives. So in today's presentation, I will briefly go over statistics, recent cyber attacks, COVID-19, and how it impacts cybersecurity for your sector, looking at cybersecurity governance, supply chain vulnerabilities, looking at a case study, and finally, we'll go through some best practices for your organizations. So next, we'll get into the statistics. So as many of you know, we all hear about cybersecurity issues on a daily basis. Cybersecurity, just to define it, is when technologies, processes, and practices are designed to protect networks, devices, programs, data from attack or damage or unauthorized access. So in terms of trucking and logistics groups, a lot of those organizations are dealing with several digital challenges at once. One of the most important of those is balancing cyber defense with modern tools. So most businesses in your sector use sensors and other Internet of Things devices to help monitor and manage your supply chain operations. Since a lot of these tools yield useful connections, they, however, tend to complicate things by adding smart products into the network that often lack security by design. So what ends up happening is that malicious actors have begun to abuse software flaws within these devices to disrupt the business. So data breaches actually resulted in about 36 billion records being exposed in the first 3 quarters of 2020 alone, according to a risk-based security study. Despite this, there's a number of publicly reported breaches that actually decreased by 51% compared to the same time last year. This, I think, could be attributed to the fact that on average, it takes about 280 days before an actual breach is recognized within an organization. So the use of malware has actually increased by 358% through 2020, and ransomware usage has increased by 435% compared to the previous years. This is according to a Deep Instinct study. In July 2020 alone, we saw an increase of 653% in malicious activity compared to the same month in 2019. And 98% of all IoT device is actually unencrypted. So this exposes personal and confidential data onto the network. So this includes non-IoT devices as well. So by 2025, there'll be approximately 41 billion connected devices. This means that by 2025, there'll be 5 times more connected devices than the current population of the globe. So 55% of logistics employees actually feel ill-equipped to identify or handle a significant cyber attack. Nearly 300 cybersecurity incidents impact supply chain were reported back in 2019, with the most common attack coming in the form of ransomware. And these numbers will definitely increase, and those reports will probably come in by the end of this year. 35% of solutions or service providers have a chief information security officer. So the good thing is there is an increase. 43% of shipping companies have a chief information security officer, whereas 21% of logistics companies believe they actually need a chief information security officer. According to recent reports and studies, the logistics industry as a whole is not moving quickly enough to address the growing cybersecurity concerns. Next, we'll take a look at the recent cybersecurity attacks. So the big one is TFI International, which is one of the largest trucking and logistics companies in North America. They were actually attacked by ransomware. It actually caused its subsidiaries to resort to manually sorting. So this cost TFI about $6 million in quarterly operating revenue. And the company did not pay the ransom. And what ended up happening was the attackers actually leaked internal data to the dark web. So another example is Total Quality Logistics, which is a Cincinnati-based company. They were breached and compromised, and their sensitive information of their carriers were actually compromised. So it actually led to a carrier lawsuit alleging negligence in the hacking of the incident. So TQL shows the potential repercussions of cyber attacks beyond just the company itself. Finally, the ransomware attack, which actually happened on a French-based shipping, CMA CGM, what ended up happening here is their functions actually went down for 2 weeks, but the impact reflected the global scope of the company. CMA CGM actually disclosed that the cost of the attack added up to $50 million. Next, we'll take a look at how COVID actually impacts the sector, specifically your sector. So first off, in general, cybercrime actually went up by 600% due to COVID pandemic outbreak. And this was an uptick in sophisticated phishing email schemes by cyber criminals. As well, malicious actors began to pose as they were part of the Center for Disease Control and Prevention or the World Health Organization, and were sending emails, and those emails then were being shared with businesses and other organizations by government officials. So this is a big problem. So since the pandemic began, the FBI actually reported a 300% increase in cybercrime. So that was what was actually reported. This isn't including any of the numbers that obviously people are unaware of that they've been breached, or those who have not reported it. So as well, during this time, Americans lost more than $97 million to COVID-19 and stimulus check scams because, again, cyber criminals were getting involved in this. Similarly, remote work has increased the average cost of a data breach by about $137,000, according to a recent IBM study. So as well, 47% of employees cited that they were distracted as being the main reason for falling for a phishing scam while working from home. So you've seen examples of network security vulnerabilities. So during this time, a network security vulnerability is essentially a weakness or a flaw which can be exploited by a malicious actor to perform unauthorized actions within a computer. Similarly, malware or malicious software is any piece of software that was written with the intent of doing harm to data, devices, or to people. So types of malware include computer viruses, Trojans, spyware, ransomware, adware, worms, files with malware or hybrid attacks. So recent malware attacks have become much more sophisticated, especially now cyber criminals are actually employing AI and machine learning to target specific emails and specific clients, and this is called spear phishing. So now we'll be also looking at your sector and how COVID has impacted the logistics sector. So this was definitely seen. The largest impact obviously was to airways and waterways. Trucking is seen as definitely a critical mode of transport amid the pandemic. So raw materials or manufactured goods are unable to reach ports due to the many lockdowns around the world. Moreover, the demand for raw materials has actually reduced because now what we're seeing is most of the traded commodities that are being requested are medicine, pharmaceuticals, medical supplies, or medical equipment. So it's also estimated that because 5G is becoming ubiquitous, there are over 200 times more cyber access points that cyber criminals can attempt to breach now that we're utilizing 5G. The reason is because 5G has this backwards compatibility. This means that it'll actually, what's happened is that it's retaining the cybersecurity legacy vulnerabilities that were already inherent in mobile versions in the 4G. And attackers are actually using to force the 5G devices to switch back to 4G technology and then actually breach the systems in that sense. So it's really important now more than ever to secure your data, your network resources, connections between your devices. And especially now with IoT devices, this task is actually increasing, and it's something that's not going to be just your IT department's responsibility, but everyone who's going to be implementing or using this. Not all operating systems actually support IoT devices. So what this means is that there's no security updates or compatibility patches. So actually, in fact, 83% do not support IoT devices. Next, I'll just quickly explain what are the different types of cyber attacks. So you've probably heard hacktivists. So essentially, this term is looking at people who have a political agenda or an environmental agenda, and they just want to breach the system just to make a point. So they're not, in fact, selling your information. So those that are going to be selling your information and breaching you or attacking you are specifically cyber criminals. So they would be the ones who would actually do that on the dark web, or lock your systems and ask you for ransomware, and so that's what their intentions are. The other common concept of cyber attacks is done by state-sponsored actors. So these are countries who have either political or economic gains by attacking either the US, Canada, or the G7 countries, and they actually benefit as a result of that. And another reason why cyber attacks happen or cyber breaches happen, it's due to hardware failures. So this is when oftentimes there are legacy systems that we have in place. And if you don't update your hardware systems, you actually end up creating opportunities for cyber criminals to get in and breach. As well, the final one is accidents caused by staff. So this is actually done unintentionally. It's not because people are causing these breaches. They may not know what to do in order to ensure that and to keep the system safe. So this is why cybersecurity education and training is important. The next, we'll take a look at social engineering. So I'm sure many of you have heard this concept called social engineering. So essentially what it is that a cyber criminal will manipulate whomever they're targeting into performing actions or divulging confidential information. So victims for social engineering attack can range from corporate executives all the way down to elementary school children. So even the most seasoned IT professionals can actually be victimized by this type of attack. So 98% of cyber attacks actually rely on social engineering. And 43% of IT professionals actually said that they themselves have been targeted for social engineering schemes in the last year. And these numbers are actually going up. And what they've also identified is that it's oftentimes new employees are the most susceptible to social engineering attacks, with that coming about ranging around 60% actually. So definitely important to ensure that there's enough training. Something else what I would recommend is in terms of safety or filtering any emails that come in or calls or text message or social messaging, just double check to make sure. Do you know the sender? Were you expecting that communication or file? If not, don't open it. Are you receiving a file? If so, do you have antivirus or malware installed? And most importantly, is your antivirus or malware up to date? Because sometimes we have it, but it's not actually up to date. And if you use email, make sure that your antivirus is installed before you even open your email. And then sometimes other forms of social engineering is when you get a link asking you to indicate that you requested a password reset. Take that extra minute and double check and see whether you initiated that. If not, don't click on that link. As well, if you receive a link to a survey or a contest, make sure, did you actually apply or trigger that somehow? Again, if not, don't click. And something else as well that's been happening is when your friends and family are traveling, and if you get an email saying, I'm stuck, I need money, make sure that it's actually your friend or your family member. Contact them by FaceTime or Zoom or Skype or whatever means, but make sure it's actually them and that they actually requested that. Another form is to social engineering is when you get incoming calls regarding services you already have. So because we're all busy, just make sure you don't complete money payment transactions on an incoming call unless it's actually you that had requested someone to call you back, and if not, don't use the same number that they gave you. If you're in, in HR and you're doing, or finance and you're dealing with payments, call the normal number that you would normally call. And don't give out more information on an incoming call, because you don't know if it's actually someone from that organization or someone pretending to be that. And always take the number they give, but use the number on a bill that you normally have. So don't, use the info that they give, because if it is a scam, you can actually report that afterwards. So just make sure you get their information as well. Finally, social media. This is another way of social engineering. What happens is social media is oftentimes breached. Make sure when you are liking something that it's within the actual social media app itself, because sometimes there are services that are connected to it, but it's not actually, your Facebook or LinkedIn. So review also any app plugins you may want to add if it's asking you to do that, and make sure you also read the permissions to find out what exactly are you enabling them to have access to. A lot of us use social media for business purposes. So unless you're showcasing your actual business place of work, if you are doing something near your home or that can identify, avoid street names or numbers if possible. And then try to minimize your personal information on social media profiles, because this is how information is gathered. And in terms of good internet behavior, obviously, when you see pop-up advertisement while you're browsing, make sure that you have your virus scan on. Don't click on anything. If anything comes up and says it's free, oftentimes nothing is free. They're data mining, and it may not even be from a legitimate website. Make sure you don't download free antivirus software, actually purchase a license for it. Also, don't use online scanners, because if you do, you're exposing your entire computer as a result. Make sure you pay attention to the URL. So if there's a lock symbol, make sure it says HTTPS. Be wary of anyone who's standing behind you or next to you in line, waiting for coffee or anywhere at the bank, especially when you're entering passwords and so on. And finally, a lot of us travel for work, or if we are using free Wi-Fi, just make sure that your VPN is on when you're accessing anything related to your work. Next, I will go through what is governance and the importance aspect of it. So essentially, governance is looking at managing how people, the applications and infrastructure interact together. So this comprises of governance framework. So 95% of cyber breaches are, as I mentioned before, caused by human error. So in order to overcome this, we definitely have to undertake good cybersecurity training and ensure that your entire organization is trained. So this includes your board right down to your employees. So your boards, your executives, your employees, and even your value chain members. So, and 68% of business leaders actually feel that their cybersecurity risks are increasing. So in order to overcome this, we have to get this into our head that everyone is responsible for cybersecurity. It's no longer just an IT problem. So, executives have to ensure that there is good cybersecurity policies and programs in place, working in tandem with your IT colleagues. So make sure you have a good CIO and ideally a chief information security officer as well. As well, when you're utilizing technology, make sure that your technology is up to date. So if you have legacy systems, try to upgrade those if possible and support any form of deployment. So next, I'll quickly go through how governance is important in your sector. So companies should establish and implement long-term strategies to decrease the possibility of a cyber attack. So logistics companies within supply chains need to kickstart your effort to better understand, assess, and mitigate cyber risks, noting that it'll not take, this will be actually much more efficient when it's actually the entire enterprise. So not just the organization itself, but also your value chain. As well, cyber threats actually can come from third parties within your supply chain. So therefore, you need to be cognizant of the vulnerabilities that may arise from them. So next, I'll go through the importance of protecting yourself from your supply chain. So the supply chain in itself is also a big risk factor. So like many businesses and other industries, logistics and trucking entities, we often see that they grant network access to their vendors, their partners, and suppliers. This enables better connectivity and efficiency, and it also helps with, keeping up with schedules, but it also expands the attack surface. So this access makes it possible for malicious actors to compromise your organization through a third-party vendor. So what ends up happening is they can misuse their network access to breach their trucking and logistics partner. So it's really important to establish, undertake due diligence, establish contractual terms that are appropriate to the information that you have within your organization and how much access you're going to enable your vendor to have. And this you need to do this not just with your new vendors, but also your current ones as well. And you should perform ongoing due diligence with existing vendors as well. It shouldn't just be done once. This should be something that you should be employing every year. It's important to include any language related to any outsourced systems. If your vendor, for example, has outsourced other services, you need to ensure that you're also protected not only from your vendor, but also whomever else that they've outsourced things to. As well, make sure you implement procedures to terminate their access, especially once your contract is over. So don't just leave it alone. Make sure once it's done, your project is completed, that you actually remove their access. And it's also important to establish and maintain, monitor any sort of entitlements to make sure it's compliant with your risk appetite, and your standards as well. Next, we'll continue on with the supply chain vulnerabilities. One thing is I would recommend is to set limits on data access by your vendor employees. Make sure your vendor employees actually have really good virus protection, that it's up to date. Also, make sure your vendors actually utilize encryption for any sort of data that they're using while in transit or at rest. And make sure your vendors have controls in place concerning subcontractors. So you should check if your vendor has a system patch management in place, As well, if they employ ethical hacking of their online systems to test the resilience. So this should be done ideally every quarter, but I mean, if you can do it twice a year, that would be amazing to ensure that your vendors do this. As well, ensure that your vendors have sufficient change management processes in place. Encourage them to join any groups that look at the common vulnerability and exposures. Specifically, there's a website to review that, and it's free actually. So, and then just ensure as well your vendors have sufficient business recovery practices in place in case there is a breach. So also, it's really important to ensure you have a non-disclosure agreement. Ask them where they store the data, how it's stored, and if they're following any breach notification responsibilities, you know, with, for example, in California, we have the CCPA, or if you're working with someone in Europe, so it's GDPR. Make sure you have the right to audit them, because you don't want to just take things at face value. You should ask them if they haven't been audited, that before you get into renewing their contract or starting a new contract, that they actually prove that they've undergone an audit from a third-party auditor, so not just an internal audit, as well as ensuring that subcontractor language is in there for your contract. And if you decide that they're not safe or secure, that you will terminate that as well. Next, I'll quickly just go through a case study. What I'm going to do is actually take an example here. Recently, there was a trucking group that was hit by ransomware, and it was identified that you know, their system actually went down, and all of their information was posted to the dark web. They were doing it in batches. So what we would recommend is to do the following. And what we did was we suggested that they disconnect the affected network from the internet, disable all the remote access to the network, reroute their network traffic, change all vulnerable passwords. And it's really important, we encourage them to set up multi-factor authentication. We were able to also establish which critical business functions were compromised, what data was affected in the breach, which systems were accessed illegally, and whether there was any unauthorized entry points that still remained. And essentially, systems were reinstalled, and the compromised data had to get restored from backups, which was a good thing, because this company actually backed up not only on the cloud, but also physically almost every 2 days, so which was fantastic. And then we helped them document what had actually occurred. And this helped because they were able to provide this not only to their cybersecurity insurance company, but also to local law enforcement as part of their reporting practice. In this particular case, it was also established that they needed to report this to the Secret Service Electronic Crimes Task Force, as well as the Internet Crime Compliance Center through the Federal Trade Commission. So luckily, the company, as I mentioned before, had cyber liability insurance, and this helped, help them with their immediate costs that occurred. As well, we connected them with a PR partner, so that helped them with their public impact. So because they have to actually notify the customers, and if the attack actually impacted any customer data as well, they issued a public press release regarding the incident. So lessons learned: after a thorough investigation, that it was determined that they needed to change their systems and their procedures. They definitely had to undergo cybersecurity education and training for the entire value chain, including the supply chain. And they actually implemented good cybersecurity governance protocols and policies. And what they ended up doing was actually including their cybersecurity incident plan within their business continuity plan. So it's really important to ensure that this takes place. So this doesn't happen to organizations. And what we also encourage is to ensure that you have external CISOs in place, because a chief information security officer outside of your organization will be less biased and will actually help identify any gaps or vulnerabilities within your organization. So next, I think it's really important for organizations to undergo an audit, and this should be done at least once a year. So when you go through your audit, it's important to ensure that you have cybersecurity policies in place. Look at whether you guys prioritize, privacy, security, physical safety, and that's also included in your policy, governance policy. As well, you should have policies and procedures in place to educate your users, not just your users, but also your board and your executives, because they could be compromised through business email compromise, as well as your third-party value chain members. Make sure your supply chain partners are integrating good cybersecurity protocols as well. And check and see if you've undergone a threat risk assessment and when was it completed. Ideally, it's good to do that every 6 months if possible. You should follow the NIST framework because it's laid out, it's quite easy, as well as undergoing a privacy impact assessment. This will help, to ensure you're compliant with CCPA, or if you're dealing with Europe at GDPR, for example. And really important to establish that you have a business continuity plan or a disaster recovery plan in place. Is there cybersecurity training program for all employees on an ongoing basis? This should be done every 3 to 6 months, ideally. And do you have a legal policy in place that explains how all users will be monitored within their systems as well? It's really important to check the backgrounds of your current employees and new employees, and you should do this every 6 months, ideally. Do you have a response plan in place for data breaches or denial of service? And if you don't have a chief information security officer, I would highly encourage you to get yourself a virtual chief information security officer, because they can at least help you and it won't be as expensive as you would have someone in-house. And then I would like to turn it over to finally to the best practices. So just to go through on the next slide. So essentially is to undergo cybersecurity technical and governance audits, as I mentioned before. Make sure you have risk and incident management plans. It's included again. Reason I'm reiterating this is it's vital that you have this in place, as well as encryption. We talked about education before. It's really important to ensure that you have encryption of all your sensitive data. So this is personally identifiable and personal health information. And it's not just data both at rest, but also at transit. Speak to your providers to see where the encryption keys actually lay, because if the encryption key is on the cloud itself, if the cloud gets breached, then all your information, or the server, all your information is going to get decrypted. So you want to ensure whatever encryption service you get is that it's endpoint encrypted. So it's encrypted on each device. As well, all devices need to be secure, especially your mobile phones if you're using it for work and you're traveling. Undergo quarterly pen testing. It's really important to also do some fire drills. Sometimes some organizations do this monthly, and they actually break up different departments and pretend that they've been breached. What would you do? And it's not just within your organization, but you can also connect with your vendors as well to make sure they're participating in this, because then you can identify any gaps. Manage your user privileges. So just because you're an executive, it doesn't mean you need to have access to everything within your organization, because oftentimes it's executives and HR and finance or compliance divisions are the ones that are targeted by cyber criminals. So make sure those are managed as well. Implement third-party vendor management policies, as I mentioned before. I would also encourage you to become part of a cyber threat intelligence collaboration organization. So there are different programs that are out there, both local and state. It would be good because this way you're kept up to date as to what are some breaches that are impacting your sector and other sectors. So this way you're not left behind. As well, I would encourage that you get your third-party vendors to also get cybersecurity insurance, because if there is an issue, then with them, then they also cover you as well. And that's it for now. So I'll open it up for questions. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Sim. So we have a few questions in the Q&A section, so I'll go ahead and read those. I know we have a little bit of time to answer them.
Sure.
So first up, we have, how often should we be undergoing cybersecurity governance training for our organization?
It really depends on your budget. Ideally, you should do it every 6 months. Some organizations actually do this every quarter because, unfortunately, cyber criminals are constantly coming up with new ways of breaching organizations. So in order to keep up to date, it's important to do that. And it doesn't have to be expensive. I mean, if you contact me, I can send you some links as well. There are organizations that charge about $350 per person to do a training, and you actually get certifications, which helps decrease your cyber insurance as well. So that would be a huge benefit for your organization too, and your value chain as well.
Awesome. Up next, we have, what steps can employees working from home take to protect their home network?
You'd have to ideally work with your IT team to ensure what systems you have. But some simple things are, make sure you have, you're using a VPN, your Wi-Fi is protected, update and try to use, if you can, multi-factor authentication if you're changing passwords and so on. Make sure your systems, any software that you've been given from work is actually up to date, because before it was easier for your IT teams to manage everything because most of you were in one location, but now that everyone's working from home, it's much more difficult. So just be active and check every month or so just to see if it's up to date, or if you get a pop-up message. I know I'm busy, I tend to ignore things, but go back and try to ensure that you haven't missed that. So yeah.
Great. Okay. Should businesses purchase cybersecurity insurance?
Definitely, because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when you find out you've been breached. So we just have to go under the guise that everyone's been breached. So at least if you have cybersecurity insurance, then you can survive, because most of the logistics sector is fairly big, but the value chain members that they're attached to can be the biggest threats, or internally could be your employees as well. So you don't want to be hit with a huge lawsuit as a result of that. So yeah.
Great. Okay. It looks like our last question is, how often should employees change the passwords for their work accounts?
I would encourage you to change it at least every month, and it shouldn't be the same, and it shouldn't be something that's like 1, 2, 3, 4, or your name, your kid's name, because as we mentioned before, if you're socially engineered, if someone's following you on different websites, they can pretty much figure that out. So there are actually bots in systems that can break down passwords. So really try to use complicated numbers and symbols and digits if you can. It really depends on each organization and the password system, but I would also encourage multi-factor authentication be part of that password system for your organization. So it's just an additional step to help protect.
Awesome. So it looks like you answered all of our questions. I'll give attendees a chance, if you have anything else, to please use the Q&A function. And if you're having trouble, you can always use the chat box. But I believe that's it for the questions that we have.
And
So
there's some references if anyone wants to take a look afterwards. So yeah,
great, perfect. Thank you so much, Sen.
thank you.
And thank you for joining us. And thank you everyone for being here. I want to give another big thank you to our title sponsor, Moffitt and Nickel. We appreciate your support you've given the Chamber over the years. And I really hope everyone's able to have their questions answered. If not, please feel free to reach out to Chamber staff and we'll get an answer for you. We will be sending a recap email with a recording of this webinar and our contact information from today. And next week, we'll have the final webinar that will be on Thursday, May 27th at 10 a.m. with Professor Nando Guerra from Cal State University Fullerton, who will be discussing the economic outlook as it relates to our recovery from the pandemic. So thank you everyone for joining.